let's talk about security. So last time we spoke about security, but then there is one more aspect of security, which is data set sharing. So just like we can share a discovery board, we can also share a data set. So if I go ahead and open for number 17. Okay, so let's assume this is or let's say this is the data set I want to share with others, right? So when I share a data set, I have the option, or I'm sharing three things with the person. I'm sharing all data within the data set. I'm also sharing the metadata of the data set, which is basically how the field types are configured. So not just the data within the data set, but also the metadata or the description of that data set. So if I go to actions and security, if you see, I have the option to share this data set. When I click on edit dataset sharing, there are a few options. Now by default, the person who has created a dataset becomes the dataset owner, right? And he has all authorizations with the dataset. But now as this dataset owner, I can share this dataset with others. And there are three modes. I can make others dataset owner. I can make others dataset viewer, which means they'll just have access to the data, right? Or view the data. And I can also make them the dataset editor, which means they can change the dataset schema. They can view the dataset schema and so on and so forth, right? Okay. The
So,
second thing.
yeah, sorry. I have a question, may I?
Mhm,
The question I had was like, for example, if we are sharing a report, right,
mhm,
to a
mhm,
certain, like, let's say I'm sharing a report to a manager or certain, or yeah, so or an HR partner for that, let's say.
mhm, mhm,
It's
mhm,
all about employee data. So when he runs the report, he or she will be able to see only relevant to his team,
data.
right?
Yes,
Or
yes.
where he to
The
that
constrained, the
organization. But
context specific data.
constraint, yeah. But that sharing is that's a report sharing, right?
Right.
Does it also apply here
No. So
or
as I mentioned,
no?
once you
Okay,
share a data
okay,
set, so on data set
right.
as
Okay.
such, at this point in time, when we discussed security last time, we mentioned
Yeah.
whatever security permissions you apply, those those permissions are applied when Workday creates the data source, right? So the permissions
Okay.
are ultimately applied in terms of data source, which allows the relevant managers to see only data for their relevant data source. So again, see,
Yeah.
you create a data set, you apply security on the data set, but and
Yeah.
then you convert the data set into the data source. So no security as such gets applied on the data set, it gets applied on the data source, which means ultimately when someone creates a report with using the data source, they only see relevant
Mm.
data for themselves. So all
Right. Right.
security
Right.
in terms of data set is all or nothing. You don't have that contextual
Correct.
security in terms of data set. It's only possible
Correct.
in terms
Correct.
of reporting and data sources. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Got you.
So
Yeah.
here
Thanks.
you get to see you are basically sharing all data, right? No security is applicable within the context of a data set itself. But then still you have the ability. So if you see here, now let me select, let's say, manager, right? And let me select uh, so let me select some security group. Let's assume HR system. The moment I do that, if you see, it is giving me an error, and the error says the role assignees, they must be, so role assignees must be current member of security groups specified for the role in the role assignees restricted to column in maintain assignable roles. So you still have the ability to control who can share this data set and with whom. So in maintain assignable roles, if I search for this task called or this role called dataset editor, it's not like anyone can go ahead and share a dataset with anyone else, right? If they are the owner. From security point of view, we have the ability to control this. So let's filter on uh, data editor, right? So this is the role we were looking at, dataset editor. And if I scroll to the right, if you see, I have basically restricted that this particular role can only be assigned to a data analyst, right? So I am restricting, it's not like I can go ahead and share a data set with anyone in that I want to. Again, let's look at this role. This role is a dataset viewer. So instead of this, let me select dataset viewer. And if you see here, the dataset viewer role I have restricted to HR administrator and analyst. So now when I select HR admin, it doesn't give me an error. However, if I select any other role, let's say HR integrations admin, it still gives me that error. So it's not like I can go ahead and share a data set with anyone I want to. This is still controlled at the security level. So now if I add any other security group or if I remove HR administrator as well. So right now it was not giving me that error, but now if I remove that role and now search for HR admin, right? Let's start from start. There's a set viewer and HR admin. It still now it gives me that error, right? So you'll only be able to share a role or a permission with a user or a security group who has the authorizations. When I search for manager, if you remember, it didn't give me a security group. It directly gave me this user, right? That is because probably this user belongs to one of the security groups who has the authorization to view a dataset. So directly gives me this position and the corresponding user. It is not giving me the manager role as such. So a data set can be shared with other users and or other security groups as long as you have specified that they are allowed to be assigned those roles using the role assignees restricted to option. All right. Okay. The next thing. Now here I'm sharing a base data set, right? If, for example, I share this derived data set, so in order to, for example, make you the editor of this DDS04, right? You should have the permissions to all the data sets till that point in time, right? Which means if I need to share this data set with you, you should have permissions to all the upstream data sets and tables that import into this data set. Only then I'll be able to share this data set with you, right? So by default, the idea is to access the current data set, whichever you're trying to access, you must have access to all upstream data sets and tables. right? Okay, now once I have applied the appropriate security restrictions, my final task is to go ahead and let's look at the lineage. I can finally, oh, hmm, didn't we connect this? I think we did, right? DDS03. Let's view new tab. I think we did a join or we didn't. I don't know. Let's quickly look at the lineage. Okay, so this is our uh, worker details BDS03, and then we have company structure, and this is the DDS04. Okay, okay. It was still showing me just this pipeline. It was not showing me the other things. Okay, that is fine. So when I checked this, it was only showing me this lineage, this entire lineage from here to here.
Okay.
Okay. So now when I'm checking this, it is showing me the entire lineage and the entire structure. Okay. So the final task is to publish a data set. Now, publishing a data set achieves a few things, and we have spoken about this uh, already many times. So publish a data set. When you publish a data set, this is what Workday does. So Workday reads all data in the data set being published, right? Creates the Prism data source with same name as the published data set, right? And loads it with the, let's write, loads this data source with the transformed data, right? That was read from data set, and finally applies the security restrictions to the data, right? We can view all publishing activities in the publishing tab. Now there are two ways to publish a data set. One is we can publish it manually, or I can publish it on a recurring basis by creating something called publish schedules. So this is what happens, right? At this point in time, let's say my DDS04 has 100 records, right? And when I publish this data set, the published data source which gets created, that data source will have 100 records, right? But then later, 1 week later, uh, 10 new employees have been hired. Their the data was also read into the base data set. And from there, it is now also available in the derived data set. So now in the derived data set, the final data set which we published last week, instead of 100, now there are 110 records because 10 new employees have been hired in the last 1 week. But these 100 and extra records will not be available automatically in the data source. So for these extra 10 records to be available in the data source, I'll have to basically republish them. Now I can republish it manually every week, Or instead of republishing it manually every week, I can create a publish schedule saying, okay, every Sunday or maybe X o'clock, it should automatically republish itself. So with respect to publish schedules, I can create a recurring schedules, which is daily, weekly, or monthly, or normal schedule, or I can also create a dependent schedule. So saying when base data set, let's say BD01, when it reads data, right? If it reads data successfully, then republish. If there is no new data which has come in, then don't republish because that doesn't have any purpose, right? So first let's see how we publish a data set manually. So now I can go to my derived data set. I can view this in new tab. And I can go ahead and republish this data set. Sorry, I can go ahead and publish this data set. So current status is not published. I'm going ahead and publishing it. The data set security listed here. Okay, this is the default security domain which is applied. If you remember, when we spoke about this for the very first time, we mentioned that uh, data flow. We mentioned that. Okay, so what happens if you have, I think I did not mention this earlier. What happens if you have not applied any security? Uh, yeah, here. So Workday implicitly applies security to the data within a data set. So if you have not applied any security permissions, then Workday automatically applies this implicit domain, which is called Prism default to dataset access. Now what it means is anyone who has access to the dataset, they are the person who would have access to the relevant data source. So it is default to the access of the dataset. So this is the implicit security that Workday automatically applies if there is no security configured on the dataset which is being published. So I'm saying submit. This will take a while to run. One more thing, you cannot publish a dataset more than once when it is in progress. So while the publishing is in progress, I cannot go ahead and create a new publish schedule, right? So there's no option to publish it once again, right? So this tab, the publishing activities, show me all the publishing activities if I published and cancelled and republished and so on and so forth. Okay, this will take some time to load. So let me take some other published data set which is already published. So for example, this data set, it is already published, right? Let me show you. This data set will take some time to publish. So let's wait for it. In the meantime, let me show you what is a publishing schedule. Right? So I published it last time, right? Now I can go in here, and if you see now publishing tab is available, right? If I want, I can unpublish this, or if I want, I can create a schedule for this. So let's see what is a schedule. This is very similar to how we create our EIB run schedules, our integration schedules. So I can either run it on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, or I can also create a dependent schedule. So dependent schedule, only two things. I can define the dependency. Now dependency is defined in terms of either a Prism background future process or a Prism data acquisition process. So what is the data acquisition process? This is, for example, the process by which data loads into your base data sets. So you can say, okay, after your base data set has successfully loaded with uh, new workers, then go ahead and run this republish this data set. So there are two Prism processes. One is data acquisition, which means new data has been acquired, and this would obviously be acquired in your base data sets. Or you can also say after some ABC data set is published, then publish this as well. So there are two processes. One is data acquisition process, one is Prism background process, right? And then I can say on what status. So after that data acquisition is, let's say, successfully completed, then go ahead and trigger this particular schedule, right? If I want, I can introduce some delays just to make sure that all data is properly updated. So maybe after this XYZ process is completed, then after 2 hours, go ahead and initiate this, right? So I can go ahead and create any published schedule. What happens when I cancel a publishing? So for example, if I cancel this is already published, which means Workday has already created data source for it, right? And if you see, this is the data source that Workday has created. Now, probably there are some reports which are already created using this data source, right? So if I go ahead and unpublish this data set, all those reports, all those discovery boards will appear in the broken status. It means they'll not load, right? They would just show blank data, right? So until you go ahead and republish this data set, all of those reports will appear broken, right? Till the point you go ahead and republish it, right? Okay, let's see if this data set is published. Okay, this is still publishing, almost done. Okay, now let's see how this data source appears, right? So there's this task which is called view prism data source. So it is this report which will show me all the Prism data sources, right? And here, if you see, this is the Prism data source, the one I published yesterday, right? And what it also means is I can go in here and it will show me all the details of the data source. It will show me all the fields that are part of that data source and the domain permission that is applicable on that data source, right? And what it also means is I can go, for example, and I can, okay, I'll not be able to proxy, right? Or open drive in proxy. It will give me an error, right? It doesn't allow proxy. So let me stop proxy. Go to drive, right? Uh, let's open one of the, okay. I think we discussed this one, right? Or this one, this discovery board. So I am opening it. edit, and I can go in here. So currently it is based on workers for HCM reporting. I can search for, if I scroll down, if you see, now in fact, the new data source is already published, the one we created November 11th. I can select this data source. Obviously, this doesn't have any filters. Next, and these are all the fields in our data source. So I want to build, let's say, a chart, and I want to get the company, and for company I want to get the total count. I'm going to delete this, right? So automatically, if you see, it is giving me, if you remember, we had just 5 companies, and for each of these companies it is giving me the count
Yeah.
of 3, right?
Yeah.
So this acts exactly like a normal one. Or maybe I want to do uh, by, let's say, uh, gender, right? So it acts exactly like a normal data source. Similar to a
Mm.
normal data source, if you see, if I come to some some numeric field, it will also show me the summarization. So for each of these companies, I can get the sum of their headcount. Let me remove gender. So for any currency field, any numeric field, Workday automatically adds the summarization. Their previous headcount, right? And the sum of their latest headcount. So for each of these companies, now I have the sum of their headcount for the last 3 years. All right. So a Prism data source behaves exactly like a normal data source. If I want, I can create a new custom report, right? By selecting this data source. So create custom report. So now transposed reports are also supported. So we can create advanced reports. We can create matrix reports. We can create composite report, WP, right? If you see, both of these are available, right? And now I can select a report type and create a normal report. All right. So I can create a report exactly like a normal data source,
Oh, that's interesting.
right? There are, of course, some limitations. You cannot use all calculated fields on this report. Uh, Let
Mm.
me write down that list as well for you.
So what will be the business object for this data source then?
There's no associated with. Let's quickly see. Uh, Test. Sorry. right? Because here on the data source itself, if you see,
Okay.
right, it has, there's no separate business object because everything is on the data source itself, right? When you open the data source,
Right.
that all the fields
Right.
were part of the data source.
So it means it only available only when you publish. Otherwise, it won't be available at
Yes,
all.
it's only available
Okay.
when you publish, because when you
Only
publish, that's when data source gets created.
right, right, right. Okay, okay, gotcha. Maybe it's silly question. So this is already a Prism related report, right? So can we create an advanced report and then expose it?
Yeah, we can. So we can create advanced reports, we can create matrix reports. We
And
can,
then,
let me delete this.
uh, so we are going to create an advanced report, and then can we enable that as a Prism again? I don't know.
What do you mean by
I know,
enable as a Prism? Oh, can you convert an advanced report into a Prism report? Is that what you're saying?
yeah, yeah.
See,
Because you
see.
already, so this is already a Prism report, Prism
Mhm,
data source now,
mhm, mhm.
and then
No,
can
you
you
cannot.
create a,
See, that is normal for any other report as well, right? Once you select a data source, your business
hmm,
object gets defaulted. So you can select a
right,
different data source, but you cannot change a data business object, right? For, and that is true for
yeah,
any report. So you'll have to create. So here the name of the data source is same as the name of the business object. So in that sense, the
correct.
business object now is defaulted and you cannot change the business object name. So which means you'll
That
have
I
to
agree.
create a new report.
Agreed, agreed. So we're going to, oh,
Hmm.
so no. There's
Go
some
ahead.
confusion. Maybe I did not ask in a right way. So if
Hmm.
you remember, we created all the three different reports, right? So one is
The
organization,
okay, okay. Hmm. ZF
employee,
one,
and
ZF one,
sorry.
ZF reports,
Yeah.
ZF
Yeah.
one.
So,
Okay.
yes, so we created all these three reports and then we enabled them as a Prism. Then only those things were available for us to create a data set,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
So now what I'm asking is now that we created this derived data set and then we did a lot of
Hmm.
transformations to get it in a structure how we wanted it, and then
Hmm.
we published it as well with a relevant security providing.
Hmm.
So the my point is now that is converted as a data source now, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So when it is converted as a data source, can I again create a custom report and enable it as an advanced and then enable that as a Prism again? You know what I mean?
Okay. Okay. So what you're saying is you'll create a new report, a new
Yes.
advanced report, which is
Yeah.
based
With the
on a Prism enabled data source, right?
correct.
Then
Correct.
use that data, that report as your base data set.
Advanced.
Yes, you can. There's no,
Okay.
so in terms of, there's no limitation, there's no restriction that when
Right.
you only reports which have some X data source or Y business object can be included in a base data set. No, there's no such
Okay.
restriction. Okay.
Okay.
So
Okay.
you
Makes
can
sense.
always do
Okay. Great. Great.
that. We can create advanced reports, we can create composite report, we can create matrix reports, we can create transposed reports and simple report. These are the 5 reports we can create using Prism data sources. So reports that can be built using Prism data sources, advanced,
How do we search? What-
matrix,
How about search report?
no, trending also no.
Okay. Okay. Time based and all
Simple,
this. Okay.
simple transposed and composite. So these are the 5 reports which are currently available. Transposed also just got added in the last release. So earlier before that, transposed was also there.
Okay.
So
Okay.
probably
No,
later work they would add other reports as well.